which I am starting right now. So welcome, and we're going to start today because it is Elul. If you have not yet had a chance to blow shofar or hear shofar this morning, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lishmoa kol shofar. So wake up. It is Elul. High holidays are coming. And since we are undertaking this momentous moment of studying Genesis, not only starting our study for the year, but starting the entire Torah, I think it's appropriate that we share a Shehechianu. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu
Shehechianu v'higianu b'zman hazeh. Amen.
Just a quick, Becca, since you were probably here at the last time.
Yes, I was here at creation. Yes, go ahead.
So I think maybe you should say something that here we are a second time around, because you were me too.
Well, thanks for the warning. What can I say? I mean, I will tell you that when this started with Rabbi Burke, he was at a point in the congregation where I think he felt established at that point, and comfortable introducing new things. He absolutely was moving the sort of philosophy and practice of Judaism in a more traditional direction. And so his suggestion that we start a Torah study group just really appealed to, a small group, but a group that said, this is something I never had in my childhood. This is something I never had, years ago. And I would love to start this journey. And so I don't remember, maybe there were 8 or 10 people at the beginning, but we were just thrilled. And I think he was very excited to introduce this to Temple Chai and to start this journey with such eager students.
There's a Frank Sinatra song that speaks to this. Torah is lovelier the second time around.
It was lovely the first time, but I'm looking forward to the second time.
Lovelier.
So, okay, I'm looking for the file with the handouts, just so that those who were not on the original distro can. Genesis and no.
Has anybody told Rabbi Burke that we finished and are starting over?
Yeah, I don't think so. Is there anybody who can share the handout in the chat?
Or the screen share?
Yeah, the screen share I'm set up for, but
anyway. You mean the PDF or the link to it?
Sure, I can share it.
I should just share the
pretty small.
Yeah. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time, a couple of administrative announcements. As Steve Haas, I have an answer for you, but I'll maybe stay after class and I'll read it. I don't want to take everyone else's time. So a couple of administrative announcements. We do have a distro list for this class. If you don't regularly get email from me and you would like to, please email me after class and I'll add you to our distro list. I see some new faces joining us. It's wonderful to have you with us. So just drop me a note, rabbi.kopel@templechai.com. Make sure you put 2 P's and 2 L's. And we also have a URL where all of our handouts and supplementary materials get posted. So we share them by email. Thank you, Barry Singer. So These were some of the supplementary material. I also sent you a Genesis from Facebook, if anyone has a copy of that to post up. And those of you who are more experienced, what am I forgetting that I should tell the new folks?
Live long and prosper, because you'll have to want to finish the whole Torah again.
Okay.
One of the things that may be helpful to know is if you miss it, Rabbi Capel will circulate it to everybody afterwards so you can watch the recorded class, which I often do, and it's very helpful because sometimes I just can't get here. So that's also something, if you miss it, you can still watch it.
That's wonderful. Yeah, so that would be a reason if you wanted to be on the distro list. So I'll send you the YouTube link after I download and upload and do all of those magical things. We always begin with a blessing. We remember that it is a mitzvah to study Torah. We are fulfilling a mitzvah here together. So, thank you very much. So Marcy put up the link. So that's what you really need to know. If you're ever missing a handout and you want to find it, save that link. Robin Young is very gracious to scan and upload all of the supplementary material. And we generally do have a lot of supplementary material. That's why the study goes so slowly, but hopefully it makes it more rich and full for everyone. So we are fulfilling the mitzvah of Torah study. So we begin with the words Baruch Atah
Adonai,
Elohim
melech
melech
haolam,
haolam,
Asher
asher
Tzidkanu
b'mitzvotav,
b'mitzvotav,
v'tzivanu la'asot
la'asot
b'divrei
b'divrei Torah.
Torah.
Amen. So here we go. Genesis 1:1. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. Bereshit. Already controversy right there in the first word of Torah, because you probably grew up with, or maybe you have a translation that says, "In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth." How many people have a translation that says something like that?
Yeah, close to it.
Whereas my translation says, when God began to create the heaven and the earth. So very small difference with a big impact. If we say in the beginning, the implication is creatio ex nihilo, as we say, creation out of nothing. There was nothing there and God began to create. If we say when God began to create, then the assumption is there is some pre-existent matter there that God is shaping and forming. So Barry Singer, you have a comment?
Yeah, in stone, it's sort of in between the two, because it says in the beginning of God's creating. So it's kind of straddling both sides, it sounds like. And
I like that.
yeah, and I'm just saying which would indicate that the Torah is giving the sequence of creation that God created the heaven, the earth, darkness, water, light, and so on. However, Rashi and Ibn Ezra maintain that this verse cannot be chronological. Our translation follows their view.
Okay, so thank you very much. So again, for those folks who are new, we're all looking at different translations and different commentaries. So one of the things that makes Torah study fun is when we are able to share the perspective of the commentator that we are reading and contrast it with the commentators that other people may be reading. You notice that the first letter of the first word of the Torah is the letter Bet. So you would think that the Torah would begin with Aleph, the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And there's a adorable midrash which depicts all of the letters of the alphabet vying for who's going to get to be the first to start the Torah. And the letters Aleph and Bet don't participate in that argument. Each letter is advocating for itself. So Bet gets to begin the Torah, and as a consolation prize, Aleph gets to begin the 10 Commandments. But the rabbis also read into the shape of the letter bet. So you see the letter bet here, and these are the handouts, the original packet of the handouts that you received. So you see the letter bet here. This is from Eitz Chaim, the conservative movement commentary, which is my go-to everyday translation and commentary. So the letter bet, of course, we're reading Hebrew in this direction. So let's look at what the commentary says. The first letter of the first word in the Torah, Bereshit, is the Hebrew letter bet. This prompted the Midrash to suggest that just as the letter bet is enclosed on three sides but open to the front, we are not to speculate on the origins of God or what may have existed before creation. You see, this is Genesis Rabbah from the Midrash. The purpose of such a comment is not to limit scientific inquiry into the origins of the universe, but to discourage efforts to prove the unprovable. It urges us to ask ourselves, how are we to live in this world? And it urges us to live facing forward rather than looking backward. Jewish theology generally has been concerned with discerning the will of God rather than proving the existence or probing the nature of God. Ultimate origins, who made God, are hidden from view, but all the rest of the world is open to inquiry. The Torah begins with bet, second letter of the Hebrew alphabet, to summon us to begin, even if we cannot begin at the very beginning. So we're reading this way. So don't worry about what's above us, about the nature of God. Nachum Sarna, in his commentary on Genesis, points out to us that the existence of God is assumed. There's no speculation about God's nature. God is known through God's actions. When God began to create, or whatever your variation on that translation is, and God's demands on human behavior. So don't worry about what's above us. Don't worry about what came before creation, and particularly don't worry about what's below us. There's not a well-developed concept of an afterlife in the Torah, but there are references to Sheol, going down to Sheol after death. But don't speculate about this. Here you are, you're the little dot in the bet, and here you have an opening to look forward. So that's how we want to live our lives, facing forward, looking at what we can do, what we should do, and don't worry about all of this. I think the Eitz Chaim commentary is also reminding us, and we're going to spend some time talking about this, that the Torah is not meant to be a scientific tome. It's not there to tell us about the origins of the universe. When we talk about 6 days of creation, we don't need to rack our brains about the literal understanding of 6 days of creation. What can that possibly mean? How could when we know that the age of the universe is billions of years, I suppose, does that contradict what we're reading in the text? No, the purpose of the Torah is to teach us how to live our lives, not to teach us science. And we can still study science. We're not told that we can't look into scientific explanations, but we're not looking for those in the Torah. I wanted to point out, I had shared with some of you, and I hopefully it's on the URL as well. Just coincidentally, a month or so ago on the CCAR, the Reform Rabbis Facebook page, somebody had asked about what are some of your favorite teachings about the first chapter of Genesis. So I copied those and sent them to you. And we're going to look at just a couple of those as well. So Andrea Kust in London points out to us, Breshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et. Okay, so you don't have the Hebrew there, but the next word, so it's et hashamayim, the heavens, ve, et haaretz, and the earth. And she says the first vav in the Torah is the connector between heaven and earth. And that vav reminds us of our own spine. The letter vav stands tall and erect. So just in the same way, we are a bridge between heaven and earth as human beings. We have a divine nature connecting us to the heavens, and we are also creatures of the earth. So we have here the beginning of the creation. I think it's also important to know that our tradition, I'm going to stop the share for a minute so I can see everyone. I also had emailed to you this midrash. This was in the body of the last email that I sent out about, okay, we know about creation, but there were a number of things that were created before creation. So I think it's interesting to just take a look at that. What's the rabbinic speculation? There are 10 things that were created at twilight right before creation. And I think that this midrash is an attempt to explain later miracles that occur and how there can be these disruptions in the order of nature. Genesis is establishing a sense of order in the natural world, and how then can we understand miracles that seem to disrupt that natural order? Well, the rabbi's answer is that God knew that those were going to be needed and provided for and made those before the world was created. So what are some of the things that were created before creation? Number one, the mouth of the earth that swallowed Korach. Remember later, I think it's in Numbers, Korach foments the greatest rebellion against Moses and Aaron's leadership in the whole Torah. And there's a test that takes place, and the earth opens up and swallows Korach and his followers. Well, that fissure, that opening, was created before creation, just waiting for that moment so that it would be available. The mouth, number two, the mouth of the well that provided water for the Israelites in the wilderness. So there was this miraculous well, interestingly associated with the prophet Miriam, that accompanied the people throughout their journey in the wilderness. That well was established before creation. The mouth of the donkey that spoke to Balaam. We know donkeys don't talk, so how can it be that we have this talking donkey? Well, there was one talking donkey created, ready and available for just that moment when Balaam needed to be stopped from cursing the Israelites. The rainbow, the manna, Moses' miraculous staff that he could turn into a snake, and that he also used to bring some of the plagues. The shamir, anybody know what the shamir is? Yes, David.
The magic worm that cut the stones.
The magic worm that cut the stones, right. So the rabbis associate knives with violence and war. So how could you build the holy temple using these instruments of violence to cut the stones that created the temple? Well, there was this magical worm, as David said, called the shamir, that was created before creation for just this purpose, to cut the stones, and the writing, the inscription, and the tablets. And then so that's the 10. And then the destructive spirits, Moses' burial place, Abraham's ram, and this is my all-time favorite, the tongues that are made with tongues. This, to me, classically exemplifies thinking. So you think about how tongues work. They hold something in place, right? So how are you going to make tongues? Because you need tongues to hold the tongue that you're going to use to make the tongues, right? So where did the first tongues come from? They were created before creation. So God provided the first tongues that were used to subsequently make tongues. I think that's fantastic. Other things, other comments on the first verse. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. So notice the name of God that is used here. I'm going to just write it up in the chat for emphasis. Elohim. And then we also know Yud He Vav He as a name of God, Yahweh. So we have these two different names of God. We have many, many names of God. We have, traditionally, we understand 70 names of God. But when we see Yud He Vav He, that refers to the God of Israel. Yud He Vav He is the particular God of Israel. Yud He Vav He is God's name, like my name is Bonnie, and your name is Willa, and your name is Sandy. God's name is Yud He Vav He. Elohim is the universal word for God. So it's not specifically referring to the God of the Jewish people. The Elohim is the universal God, God as the creator. So that's kind of big picture God, Elohim. And what's really interesting about that image of God is that it's in the plural. So it's God encompassing all gods, Elohim. I want to turn in just a moment to.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Elohim is the plural form,
Right.
as opposed to when we say Eloheinu or Elohe. Is there a significance to the fact that it's a plural form?
Eloheinu.
Elohim.
Elohe. Yeah, I'm just writing the two terms you mentioned there. Yeah, so plural, I think, in the sense of all encompassing. This God encompasses all others. And when
all other gods. That's what I was,
gods.
yeah, okay. That's what I was thinking.
When we say Eloheinu, it's still, Elohim is still in there. That's, what do you call that? Conflation, contraction? What's the grammatical?
Contraction is a word, but I don't know if that's what you mean.
Right. So isn't is not.
Right.
It's a contraction.
Isn't. So Eloheinu is a contraction. It's a contraction of two words. Elohim Shelanu. So our God.
Okay.
Elohim Shelanu becomes Eloheinu. Elohai. Elohim Sheli becomes Elohai. So those are still incorporating this idea of plurality.
Thank you.
Yes, David.
Bereshit.
Yes.
Reshin, Aleph.
Reish Aleph Shin.
Right, sorry, Reish Aleph Shin. Rosh Hashanah, Rosh Chodesh is creation, the beginning, connected to each of the months too, somehow to the head.
It's the idea of head.
Rosh, but
so it's
that's the word Bereshit. Is it connected anyway to the creation of each month in the cycle?
Well, I think, midrashically, we could certainly midrashically make that connection. So we just celebrated Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of the new month. So every new month is called Rosh Chodesh. Is midrashically we say Rosh Chadash, a new head. So every month brings with it a new possibility, a new opportunity. We begin again we get a new head, Rosh Chodesh. But it's more midrashic. From a grammatical perspective, though, Bereshit is connected to Rosh. So it's the head of creation, just like Rosh Hashanah is the head of the year and Rosh Chodesh is the head of the month.
Okay.
Yes, Sherry?
The notion of Elohim as a plural,
Yes.
that there are multiple gods, the recognition that there can be multiple gods. That's something I hadn't really heard before. Where were these multiple gods, and how does that concept evolve?
There are gods in the ancient Near East. Gods were considered to be local. So you had the god of this area and the god of this area. In fact, when you traveled from one area to another, it was almost like a political allegiance, that there was a political ruler and there was a god ruler in that location. And so that was Abraham's unique insight, was the idea of a universal God, of a God who is the God of all creation, not just the God of the Hittites and the God of the Canaanites and the God of Babylon versus the God of wherever else.
And so implicitly, there is recognition of other gods.
Yes, other nations worship other gods, absolutely.
Location.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, we're blessed with 23 people, and I can only see a certain number on my screen. So, as somebody who has more experience with Zoom, how do I know if somebody on another screen is raising their hand and wants to make a comment if I can't see them? Is there any way to know that?
I think you have to be on an actual computer and not an iPad.
I'm on a computer.
No, the computer only does 15 at a time.
Yeah, I can see, I think, 20.
Oh, okay.
So hit your gallery view and it changes.
Yeah, I have gallery view, but there's a second page. So
Hit your gallery view. It should bounce around the people in your gallery view.
Yeah, but I'm still not seeing anyone.
Okay.
And there's an arrow on the side to take
Right, but here's the point. I'm talking. If somebody on the page that I'm not looking at wants to make a comment, how do I know that?
May have to use the chat.
That's what I'm thinking. So if you have your hand up and you have something you want to say and I'm not calling you, please please put a comment up in the chat, and I'll try to be aware of that as well.
I don't see her. I'm looking for a raise hand kind of thing, and I don't.
Yeah.
It used to be.
Yeah, there did. It used to be.
Should be down at participants.
Yeah, there is something in participants. Oh,
Yeah, look at the lower left of participants.
It puts up a screen of participants and allows the opportunity to raise hand.
Yeah.
Because I'm on that screen now.
Oh, yeah.
See the lower left? Yeah.
But what can you see? Can you see that?
Well, all right, I'll click raise hand, Rabbi. What do you see?
I see 4 participants raise their hands. So
Okay.
And then how do I just.
You have to keep the participants window open?
No, you can go in and out of it.
I meant for her to be able to see it all the time. It's a good problem to have, so many of us.
It is.
On a sidebar on the Mac, I can go up to 25 before it shifts over.
Yeah.
So can I, but I'm on a larger monitor, which is probably why.
All right. Okay. Let's just go with the chat fix for right now. I mean, yeah, I see that my mom raised her hand. Very good, Mom. But okay, So just be aware. I just don't want anyone to think I'm ignoring you if I don't call on you. It's, you know, it's technical difficulties. So hopefully you have I want to move on to Dennis Prager's commentary, a couple of thoughts that he has about Genesis and science. I don't know if this is a concern to anyone in this group, but I think he very concisely talks about the challenge that some point to of how do we reconcile Genesis with science. Dennis Prager is writing a commentary on the Torah. He calls it the Rational Bible, which is an interesting choice. We looked at some of his comments on the Ten Commandments. I think when we looked at idolatry, we read his essay on idolatry in Leviticus. So I know that he's a controversial figure, but we learn in Pirkei Avot that the wise person learns from everyone. So whatever you think about Dennis Prager's politics, I wouldn't want that to impact your ability to be open to some of his commentary. So again, if you received the handouts, you're looking for this essay, Do Science and Genesis Conflict? And I will keep it up there for those who may not have received the handout, but I'd love a volunteer to read for us. We're gonna just read a couple of pages here.
I'll read. Where do you want me to start?
Right here, a major barrier.
Okay. A major barrier to many modern men and women take the Bible seriously is the belief that science and Genesis conflict, and consequently that religion and science conflict. Therefore, this subject needs to be addressed. First, the notion that the Genesis creation story must agree with science is itself untenable. If Genesis described exactly how the world was created, it would be unintelligible to us, let alone to all those who preceded us over the past 3,000 years. It might not even be in intelligible language, but in yet to be discovered mathematical or physics equations. The Torah must speak in language that is intelligible to human beings in every past generation as well as in every future generation. Clearly then, it cannot speak in scientific terms. At the same time, it should not violate essential scientific truths. For example, it accurately depicts human beings as the last creation. Moreover, we have no idea what science will say about cosmology, the beginning of the universe, in 100 years. In my lifetime alone, science went from positing a universe that always existed to positing a universe that had a beginning, the Big Bang.
Let me just stop you there. So we're going to see in a couple of moments the Lurianic Kabbalistic view of creation, which is very aligned with the Big Bang Theory. So just a preview of coming attractions.
Do you want me to continue?
Please.
So in just one generation, the Torah, in describing a beginning to the universe, went from conflicting with science to agreeing with science. But this is not necessarily a comment on the Torah, because science, to its credit I might add, is always changing. Second, while Genesis 1 must accord with what is true, the purpose of Genesis 1 is not to teach science. It is to teach about God, man, and nature. That is why the Torah is eternal and why few scientific claims are. Among other things, Genesis 1 teaches, and the following are bulleted. God is beyond nature. All previous gods were gods of nature or part of nature. Therefore, there is a reality outside of nature, and that has incomparably important ramifications for us humans. It means this physical world is not all there is. God is not a sexual being. All previous gods engaged in sex with other gods and or mortals. There is only one God of humanity. All pre-existing gods were attached to one tribe, religion, or nation. There was no God of all humanity. God represents order versus the forces of disorder and chaos, which are the norm both in nature and in human society. God has a special role for the human being. God is moral and has a moral will. Because of all of this, there is a transcendent purpose to life. Science, on the other hand, teaches none of that. Science teaches science, which is no small thing, and a vast number of people, myself included, are, I'm sorry, a lot of this is cut off in what I have, are alive thanks to science. But science doesn't teach right from wrong, or even that there is a right and wrong, nor does it provide ultimate purpose. Science is the study of the physical universe, which, without God and religion, is bereft of ultimate purpose. If there is no God, we humans spend an infinitesimally tiny period of time between oblivion, before we were born, and extinction, after we die. Genesis 1 does not seek to teach science. It seeks to teach wisdom. While the present generation knows more science than any generation in history, I believe it possesses less wisdom than many preceding generations.
Mhm.
And the biggest single reason is that it has decided God, the Bible, and religion are not necessary, and that only science is. Finally, it is worth noting that many scientists believe in God and the Bible. In 2010, Oxford University published a book titled Science versus Religion, What Scientists Really Think, by Elaine Howard Eklund, a Rice University professor of sociology. This was her finding, quote, "After 4 years of research, at least one thing became clear. Much of what we believe about the faith lives of elite scientists is wrong. The insurmountable hostility between science and religion is a caricature, a thought cliche, perhaps useful as a satire on groupthink, but hardly representative of reality," unquote.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much. Good. So is there anyone who has that concern about an opposition between what we read in Genesis and science? Is that, yes, Kathy?
The concern that I have is that it's diametrically opposed. There's no room for overlap or being able to peacefully coexist and honor the other. Science is science, religion is religion, but why can scientists and religious people not believe both? And I think that's what he's trying to say.
Yeah, it's actually a good summary. So he's trying to posit that those things are not in opposition. Science and religion don't need to be in opposition. They're answering essentially different questions.
Mhm.
It's interesting, the comment about God not being a sexual being. One of the controversial things we're going to see in the Parsha of Genesis, if not in the first chapter, is that there is reference to divine beings having sexual relations with human women. So that the Midrash really struggles with how to reconcile those two. But that'll be something for the future. Any other thoughts about his emphasis on the necessity of a religious perspective for meaning in life? He kind of implies, if not says straight out, that without religion there's no meaning, that science alone cannot provide a sense of meaning, that if we're born, we die, and there's nothing before, nothing after, no accountability, that our lives are essentially meaningless.
The assumption seems to be that the meaning can only come either from religion or science, and in practice that's not really the case. There's definitely a lot of meaning to be found in life without religion, and plenty of people do. I think religion can definitely provide that for some people, and it certainly adds to it. But not everybody finds it necessary to still find meaning in life.
So for one thing, it's really important that we remind ourselves that there are plenty of good people who are not religious and plenty of religious people who are not good. So they're not necessarily mutually entailed.
Right.
But I think, Kat, what you're saying is taking issue with Prager, who says, no, religion is the only source of meaning. And I think he would even disagree with your premise that you can derive meaning from a strictly scientific perspective.
I think David has.
I think I'd have a little disagreement with Prager about only God has a morals. It depends on who's defining God and the definition of what they're saying morals are. Are you an untouchable to the Brahmins? Are you gay? Are you a woman? There's a lot of people who speak that this is what's in the Bible and that's from God. But if you're saying that God is all this, then God doesn't go around making morals up. Morals are a behavior. So I think this is where Prager gets off. He goes fine until it starts getting on where he thinks morals and behavior should be. So, but if you don't define morals and behavior, what's the difference from that from science?
Yes. Marcy?
I actually agree with Kat that they're not mutually exclusive. I remember when I was pretty young, when I started getting interested in science, thinking, well, how come God couldn't have created science? And I mean, that's sort of as far as it ever went, but I still kind of believe that. I think I was about 10 when I thought of that. And so to me, they're not mutually exclusive. You can certainly have both. And that's sort of all I have to say, I think.
Yeah, Steve Haas put a comment privately in the chat. Science and creation story can coexist. Before Adam, the days are God days, which could be longer than man days. Just one example. So, Steve, my response to that would be, I don't even need to go there. I can understand the Torah as allegorical, as metaphorical. I don't need to calculate. So if it says 6 days of creation, well, each day is really, I mean, the Psalms do say, one day in your life, God, is like a 1,000 days in ours, right? So does that mean that the creation took place over 6,000 years because each day is 1,000 days? I think it's not, to me, it's not about arithmetic. I think Prager's point is one that we need to carry with us throughout our study. He's quoting the Talmud that says the Torah speaks in human language. It's when we read, here's another one, Steve. When we read, God took us out of Egypt with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. Do we have to say how we understand God's hand and arm? No, I think we can understand that as a metaphor.
I mean, the conflict really only comes in if literalism is applied to the Bible. Like, if you are going to take the Bible literally, then yeah, that's going to cause a conflict with science because things don't line up. And that's where we get a lot of the science denying sides of religion, and then the hostility from science towards religion. If you aren't taking it literally, if you're looking at it more metaphorically and allegorically, there really isn't a conflict because it's just a way to verbalize concepts that were really hard to understand, especially before scientific advancement.
So that's exactly the point I'm trying to make. And I thought it was important to get that out there as we're beginning this story so that we're not constantly bogged down by looking at you know, well, how can that be true? How can that be true? That, you know, that's not real. Owen?
There's a fantastic example of this debate in Inherit the Wind. Clarence Darrow basically wins the case against the anti-evolutionary teaching in Tennessee by basically saying, but before there was a sun and the moon, could a day have been 1,000 years? Could a day have been 1,000,000 years? And essentially, that encapsulates this whole discussion. I think the point is that it's what you want it to be. That it's how, for whatever reason, you fall on the side of science or you fall on the side of religion only, you're missing the richness that the integration of those two perspectives brings.
Yeah, it would be great to find that literary piece and take a look at it in this conversation.
I happen to have it. I'll get it for you.
That would be great. Terry?
I just always have to hearken back to the fact that these stories we're about to read, up until we get into Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and the stories of the family, everything through the flood existed prior to the writing of the Torah. Those stories existed in other civilizations.
Oh, absolutely.
And are written down in things like the Gilgamesh epic and other places. So the Tower of Babel, all my favorites from when I was a kid, you know, the Tower of Babel, I spent days and hours and weeks as a child comprehending and trying to fathom how awesome that would be, that was, whatever. So I just want to bring that back into it, because I think if you try to rationalize these scientifically, in many cases you wind up, they're about as scientific as the African theory of how the moon and stars got into the sky. Yeah. That they started on the ground, and when they started gathering strength, they were too big to fit, so they popped out. I mean, things like, yeah.
Yeah, no, you're right, Terry. And, you know, when we get to verse 2, there's a reference to the earth was unformed and void, and we're going to see that the word tohu vavohu is etymologically related to Tiamat, who was an ancient, I think, Babylonian goddess, and that is directly lifted from the Babylonian creation story. So
these early Genesis stories have wonderful meanings to them and wonderful depth to plot. But to me, the fascinating part is the connections to what came before, and then the comparison of how we changed that.
Yes.
How we modified.
That's just what I was going to say. Barry Kipnis, you're next, but you know, I'm thinking about that's always been the Jewish genius, is to take whatever was in the culture and lift it up, I would say, to make it more holy.
To turn bread into a bagel.
Yeah. So, you know, you talk about Noah. So in Enuma Elish, the Epic of Gilgamesh, why does the flood come in the Torah? It's because of human immorality. In the original Epic of Gilgamesh, it's because the people on earth are making too much noise and disturbing the gods. Barry Kipnis?
I've always tried to view the creation story as an order of creation rather than a day. First, this happened, then second, that happened, and so on. In other cultures and other creation stories, it's the same order of creation. So if rather than on the first day, he separated the land from the heavens from the earth, well, that was the first thing that happened. Then the second thing, and after everything was done in 6 tranches, so to speak, on the last one would be Shabbat, would be the day of rest, because in the first 6 orders of creation as we sort of know it in our current society occurred.
So we're winding down on time. Thank you, Barry. I want to go back and investigate and look next week a little bit at the Higgs. Was it the Higgs boson particle? Remember a couple of years ago there was a big
Yep.
scientific thing about the
Yes.
discovery of the so-called God particle. So I'm just
Right.
barely remembering that. That'll be interesting to take a look at. And the last thing I just want to point out in this opening verse, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim. So et is an interesting word in Hebrew. It's not really translatable. It indicates a direct object. So it serves a grammatical function, but it's not translated. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim. God created hashamayim, the heavens, and the earth. So what is this et? So again, in that CCAR commentary, the same Rabbi Andrea London pointed out that this word et is aleph and taf, the first letter of the alphabet and the last letter of the alphabet. And I thought that was so sweet, you know, that in the beginning, God created the Hebrew alphabet, aleph through taf. So yeah, isn't that cute? So I wanted to leave us with that. We're going to pick up next week looking at the women's Torah commentary. Somebody talked about women earlier as being an excluded category. So let's see what the women's Torah commentary has. If you go back to that link, maybe I'll resend you all the links. If you are not on our regular distro list, again, please contact me and let me know. Steve Haas, stay on and I'll read you what Debbie had to say. Let's conclude. Oseh shalom b'mah.
Shalom.
Aleinu v'al
Israel
Yisrael. Amen.
Amen.
Let me be among the first to wish everyone a Shana Tova. And please, please, please come to at least one of the Torah from COVID conversations. I need everybody's input from that.
Very good.
All right.
Thank you.
Rabbi, are you staying on with the new people for a few minutes?
I